When I opened my front door on Thanksgiving night, my grandson was standing outside, shaking in the cold. He told me he wasn't allowed inside because there wasn't enough room at the table. My own family, my children, their spouses, everyone, had chosen to eat a warm meal together while my grandson froze on the porch. That was the night I realized I didn't have a place in my own family anymore. Before we continue, please like this video and share your own story in the comments. I woke up earlier than usual that Thanksgiving morning. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for a long moment I just sat on the edge of the bed, listening. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. No clatter of dishes, no voices, no footsteps from upstairs, just the sound of an empty house, breathing with me. I got up anyway. Habit, I suppose. I went into the kitchen and started peeling potatoes, even though I hadn't actually heard from anyone about whether they were coming. My hands just knew what to do. That's what I've always done on Thanksgiving. Get the potatoes ready first, set the table, start the slow process of making a home feel full. But as I stood there, peeling in silence, I felt something heavy in my chest, a mix of hope and dread. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the doorbell would ring later. Dread that it wouldn't. After the potatoes were done, I set my small table, 3 plates, just in case, though I didn't know who the 3 were supposed to be anymore. I placed the silverware neatly, even folded the napkins like my late wife used to. I stood there staring at that little table for a while, wondering if I was setting it for ghosts. I tried to distract myself with small chores, wipe the counters, check the oven, even though there was nothing inside it yet, but I kept reaching for my phone, hoping to see my message from my son or my daughter. Anything to let me know I wasn't forgotten. When I finally unlocked it, the first thing I saw was a new picture in the family group chat. My daughter had sent it. Her kitchen was bright and warm, her table already full of food, turkey in the center, candles lit, everyone smiling in the background. And there, just barely in the corner of the frame, I could see my chair, the one I always sat in. But this year, someone else was sitting there. I stared at that picture for a long time. I read the caption, "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone," and my heart sank a little lower. No message for me. No, "Dad, are you coming?" No, "Save you a plate." I told myself maybe they were just busy, maybe the invite was coming later. Maybe they assumed I'd show up on my own. But a part of me knew that wasn't true. So I waited. All afternoon I waited. I turned on the TV but couldn't focus on anything. I sat in my chair by the window and watched cars pass by, watched neighbors unloading groceries, welcoming family. Every sound outside made me sit up a little straighter, thinking maybe it was someone coming to see me, but no one came. By the time the sun started to go down, I had given up on the idea of cooking a full meal. I made myself a sandwich instead. I sat at my table, staring at the 2 empty plates across from me, and tried to swallow around the lump in my throat. That was when the phone rang. I almost jumped out of my chair. For a second, I thought maybe it was my son. Maybe he had finally realized and was calling to tell me to come over, but it wasn't. It was my grandson. His little voice was hushed, like he was hiding somewhere. "Grandpa," he whispered, "I wish you were here." Those 5 words. They hit harder than anything my kids could have said. I asked him where he was, and he said he was in the garage, hiding from the noise. He told me everyone was laughing and eating, but he didn't feel like laughing because he kept thinking about me sitting alone. I didn't know what to say. I told him I was okay, told him not to worry about me, but I think we both knew I was lying. He said, "I'm going to save you a piece of pie." And then I heard someone call his name and the line went quiet. When I set the phone down, my house felt even quieter than before. And for the first time that day, I let myself really feel it, the sting of being left out, not by accident, but on purpose. I sat there for a long time, staring at my untouched sandwich, wondering what I had done wrong. Had I said something last year? Had I been too quiet, too grumpy, too old? It's a strange thing, sitting alone on a holiday and realizing you weren't forgotten, you were excluded. And I wish I could tell you I didn't take it personally. I wish I could tell you I just brushed it off, told myself families get busy, but the truth is, it broke something inside me. If you've ever felt that kind of hurt, The kind that comes not from strangers but from the people you raised. You probably know what I mean. If you have, well, maybe take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, tell me if you've been there too. It helps to know we're not the only ones. After that call, I didn't bother cleaning up the table. I left the plates where they were and went to bed early. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the same quiet house, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if there would ever be a Thanksgiving where I had a place at the table again. It was already getting dark by the time I heard it, that faint knock on my front door. At first I thought I was imagining things. I hadn't had a visitor all day, and the street outside had been quiet for hours. But then it came again, just a soft, quick knock, like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I opened the door, and there he was, my grandson, standing on the porch, wearing a thin coat that wasn't nearly warm enough for the November air. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold, and his hair was sticking to his forehead. "Grandpa," he whispered, looking up at me like he wasn't sure if he should have come. I ran away for a little bit. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, taking in the sight of him. This little boy who had left a warm house full of food and laughter just to come stand on my porch. My heart broke and swelled all at once. I stepped aside and told him, "Come in, son. Come in before you freeze." He slipped past me quickly, like he was afraid someone might see him. I closed the door behind us, and the house felt a little less empty. I helped him take off his coat and sat him near the heater. His hands were ice cold, so I found an old blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders. For a minute, we didn't say anything. I just watched him thaw out, watched the color come back to his fingers. "Were they worried about you?" I finally asked. He shrugged. "They're too busy. Everyone's still eating." He hesitated, then added in a quieter voice, "I just didn't want you to be alone, Grandpa." Those words, they hit me harder than I expected. I felt something tighten in my throat, and I had to look away for a second. Here was this child, barely old enough to understand the weight of what was happening, and somehow he was the only one who saw me, the only one who thought about what it might feel like to sit in this house alone while the rest of them were together. I went to the kitchen and made us tea, weak tea because that's all I had, and found a few biscuits left in the tin. We sat together at my little table, steam rising from our cups, and for the first time all day, the house didn't feel so cold. He started talking in that quiet, hesitant way kids do when they know they might get in trouble for saying too much. He told me about the food, about the noise, about how everyone was talking and laughing. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "They put Uncle Mark in your chair this year," he said. "They said there wasn't enough space." I stared at him for a moment. "Did they say that?" I asked carefully. He nodded. "Mom said, we'll just move things around this year." He looked down at his cup and mumbled, "I told them you could sit by me, but they just laughed and said not to worry about it." I didn't know what to say to that. I sat back in my chair and let his words settle in. This wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't me being forgotten by accident. It was a choice. A quiet, deliberate choice. I felt something hollow open up in my chest. For years I'd been telling myself little stories to soften the truth, that they were just busy, that life had gotten complicated, that the kids didn't mean to leave me out. But now, hearing it from him, I couldn't pretend anymore. I wasn't just being left behind by time, I was being left behind by them. My grandson must have felt the shift in me because he looked up suddenly, his eyes wide. "I didn't mean to make you sad, Grandpa," he said quickly. I forced a small smile and reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You didn't, son. You just told me the truth. That's all." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He sat there quietly for a moment, swinging his legs under the chair, and then said softly, "I like it better here anyway." Something about that made me laugh. A quiet, almost broken laugh, and the sound seemed to surprise us both. We finished our tea in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that means something is being shared, even without words. When it was time for him to go, I helped him with his coat again. I asked if he wanted me to walk him back, but he shook his head. "I know the way," he said, like he was a soldier on a mission. I watched him walk down the path toward the road until he disappeared from view. Then I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where he had been, the house behind me suddenly feeling too quiet again. That night, as I sat alone once more, I thought about what he had told me, about the chair, about no space. It's strange how something as small as a chair can hurt so much. It wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a place, my place, and it was gone. I sat there until long past midnight, thinking about all the little ways I had been moved aside over the years. Fewer photos, fewer phone calls, fewer visits that lasted more than 10 minutes. I wondered if this was just what happens when you get old, or if maybe it was me, maybe I had done something to deserve it, but no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind, I couldn't come up with anything. All I had ever done was love them. I wish I could tell you I found some peace that night. I didn't. But there was something about my grandson's visit that stayed with me. The fact that he cared enough to come, to sit with me, to tell me the truth, that meant something. It didn't fix the hurt, but it reminded me that I wasn't completely invisible. Not yet. I went to bed late, still hearing his small voice in my head. I just didn't want you to be alone. And even though the ache was still there, I think that was the first night I started to understand that I might not be able to change what the rest of them were doing, but I could choose how I faced it. I called my son the next morning. I didn't sleep much that night, just kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about that empty chair at the table and wondering why nobody thought to fill it with me. My hands shook a little as I dialed his number, which is silly, I suppose. He's my boy. Why should I be nervous to talk to him? He answered on the second ring. Hey, Dad, he said in that tone people use when they're halfway distracted, like he was scrolling through something while talking to me. I tried to keep my voice light. Hey, son, how was dinner last night? There was a pause, just a beat too long. Then he said, It was good. Everyone had a nice time. I swallowed, staring at the phone like maybe it could tell me the rest of the story. I didn't get an invite this year, I said. He sighed. I could hear him shifting, maybe leaning against a counter. Yeah, Dad, we thought it would be easier this year if you didn't come. Things were crowded and, well, it's just simpler this way. Simpler. The word sat heavy in my chest. I don't even remember what I said back. Probably something like, I understand. But I know my voice sounded strange to me, like it was coming from far away. I hung up and just sat there with the phone in my hand, staring at nothing. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. Eventually, I set the phone down on the table and put my head in my hands. My son had just told me, in the gentlest way he knew how, that I wasn't needed anymore. That's what it felt like, anyway. And sitting there, I started thinking about all those years. All the nights I worked double shifts so they'd have new clothes for school. All the times I stayed late to make sure the mortgage got paid. I remembered coming home after midnight, slipping into a quiet house where everyone was already asleep. I thought I was building a good life for them. I thought every sacrifice was worth it. I never imagined the reward for all of that would be this, silence on Thanksgiving. Maybe this is just how life works, I thought. Maybe kids grow up and you stop being the center of their world. But it felt like more than that. It felt personal. Because the I sat there, the more I realized this wasn't about just one dinner. It wasn't just this Thanksgiving. This had been building for a long time. Little moments I brushed off. Excuses I told myself were reasonable. I thought about last Christmas, when they told me they were keeping it small this year. But I saw pictures later of a full table with friends and cousins. I thought about the summer before, when I offered to come help fix their deck, and my son said, No, Dad, we've got it handled. It hit me like a slow, heavy wave. Little by little, I had been moved further and further to the edges of their lives, and I had let it happen. I got up and made coffee, even though I didn't really want it. I just needed something to do with my hands. The kitchen felt too quiet. The house felt too big. I found myself walking through the rooms, looking at the family pictures on the walls. There we were, smiling at the Grand Canyon when the kids were little. There we were at my daughter's graduation, at my son's wedding. In every picture, I looked proud. Tired sometimes, yes, but proud. I stood there a long time, staring at those pictures, trying to reconcile the man in those frames with the man standing alone in the kitchen now. At some point, I must have sat down at the table again, because when I came back to myself, I was just staring at the wood grain, tracing it with my finger like a map. That word wouldn't leave me. Simpler, easier. As though my presence was a burden. I started replaying the conversation in my head, word for word, tone for tone, until I could hear every pause, every sigh. I could almost see his face on the other end of the line, trying to be polite, trying not to hurt me, and somehow that made it worse. Because if he had been angry, if he had yelled, I could have yelled back. If we had fought, at least there would have been fire. But this was just quiet, a gentle pushing away. I think that's what broke me the most. I got up and opened the back door, just to feel the cold air on my face. The yard looked exactly the same as it did the day before, but it felt different somehow, like it belonged to someone else now. For a long time I just stood there, letting the November air bite at my skin, wondering when it had all shifted. Was it when my wife passed away, when I sold the house and moved into this smaller place, when I stopped driving at night? Or was it something else entirely? Something I can't put my finger on, that made me less a father, and more just an old man they felt obliged to call on birthdays. I don't know. But as I closed the door and went back inside, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to stop with Thanksgiving. This was the new normal, and I wasn't sure what hurt more, the thought of being left out again, or the possibility that next year I might not even be surprised. I sat down, folded my hands, and just let the quiet stretch out around me, and that was the moment, right then, that something shifted inside me. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a different chapter in my life. A week passed before I did anything at all. Most days I just sat with my coffee and stared at the backyard while the November wind rattled the last of the leaves from the trees. I didn't call anyone, didn't answer the few texts that came in. I just let the silence settle around me. On the 7th day, I went to the hall closet and pulled down an old box of photo albums. They were dusty, heavier than I remembered. I carried them to the kitchen table and opened the first one. It's strange how a photograph can hold a whole world inside of it. There I was, younger, stronger, standing at the head of the table with a carving knife in my hand, smiling while everyone laughed around me. My wife had taken that picture. She was good at catching moments like that. Little pieces of life that seemed ordinary at the time, but somehow became treasures. Page after page, I saw the same thing. Kids with messy hair and sticky fingers, the table full of food, my arms wrapped around someone's shoulders. I remembered the noise of those years, the clatter of plates, the sound of my daughter's laugh, the way my son always stole a roll before we said grace. I smiled a little at that memory. But as the albums moved closer to the present, something shifted. I started to notice where I stood in the pictures. In the early ones, I was always at the center, holding the turkey, lifting a grandchild, looking like the anchor of the whole scene. But somewhere along the way, I had moved to the edge. In one photo from 3 years ago, I was half turned away, caught mid-blink. In another, from last year's Easter, I wasn't in the picture at all. Just my son, his wife, their friends, smiling in my living room. I sat there with my hands on the album, staring at the blank space where I should have been. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It wasn't even about this year. I had been slowly disappearing from the family table for a long time. It was so quiet, so gradual, I hadn't even noticed it happening. I closed the album and sat back in my chair. The kitchen was dark now, just a little square of light from the window. I didn't bother to turn on the overhead light. I sat like that for a long time, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator, until finally I reached for a pen and an old notebook I keep by the phone. On the first empty page I wrote, "I have become a ghost in my own family's story." The words looked stark there on the paper, but they felt true. And strangely, as heavy as that realization was, it also brought with it a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I think that was the moment I stopped fighting it. I closed the notebook and set the pen down. Then I got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and made a quiet decision. I wouldn't call them again for a while. No more waiting for an invitation that might not come. No more checking my phone every hour, hoping for a message. I would just let it be. At first, that decision felt like another loss, like I was stepping back even further, making myself even smaller. But as the days passed, something shifted. I started cooking just for myself. Simple meals, a piece of fish, a little rice, maybe a baked potato. I set one plate on the table, poured one glass of water, and ate slowly, without rushing. The house was quiet, yes, but it wasn't the same hollow silence as before. It was peaceful, like I had finally put down a heavy bag I'd been carrying too long. Sometimes, after dinner, I would wash my single plate and just stand by the sink, listening to the running water. I would think about the noise of those big family dinners, about how crowded the house used to feel, and I would wonder if this was how my own parents felt when we started spending holidays with our own children instead. Maybe this was just the way of things. Still, there was an ache that never quite went away. At night, I would sit in my chair with the old albums nearby, though I didn't always open them. Just knowing they were there was enough. Some evenings, I would take out my journal and write a few lines, not long entries, just little fragments. Made soup today, quiet but good. Thought about calling him, didn't. Snow coming tomorrow. I don't know why I kept writing, maybe because it felt like proof that I was still here, still living this life, even if no one was watching. After a week or two, I noticed something else. I wasn't checking my phone as much. I wasn't waiting anymore. And that surprised me. Because for so long, I thought that's what being a father meant, being available, being ready to jump when they needed me. But maybe there was another way to be a father now. Maybe it meant stepping back, letting them live their lives, and learning how to live mine again. That night, I cooked a small steak and opened a bottle of wine that had been sitting in the pantry for years. I lit a candle, just one, and ate slowly while the snow began to fall outside. I didn't feel happy, exactly, but I didn't feel abandoned either. For the first time in a long time I felt still, and maybe that was enough for now. It was a Thursday afternoon, about a week after the snow had melted into slush, when I heard the sound of sneakers pounding up my front steps. At first I thought it was the mailman, or maybe a delivery driver, but then came a soft knock, quick, almost secretive. When I opened the door, there he was, my grandson. His backpack was still on, his hair sticking up in the back, cheeks red from running in the cold. "Grandpa," he said, a little out of breath, "can I come in?" I stepped aside without saying a word, and he brushed past me, the way kids do when they're trying not to lose their courage. He dropped his backpack by the door and stood there, shifting from one foot to the other. "I didn't tell Mom I was coming," he said, almost like a confession. I nodded slowly. "You're safe here." I led him to the kitchen, and he sat at the table while I put on the kettle. The house had been so quiet these past days, just the sound of the clock ticking and the hum of the furnace. But with him there, everything felt warmer somehow, like someone had opened a window and let the air move again. When the tea was ready, I set a mug in front of him and slid the plate of biscuits across the table. He didn't touch them at first, he just stared down at the steam curling up from his cup. Finally, he asked it. "Why didn't you come to Thanksgiving?" I sat across from him and folded my hands on the table. How do you explain something like that to a child? Something that even you are still trying to make sense of? I kept my voice gentle. "Sometimes," I said, "grown-ups make decisions they think are best for everyone, but those decisions can hurt, even when they don't mean for them to." He looked up at me then, his face serious in a way that reminded me of his father when he was young. "Did Dad tell you not to come?" I hesitated, then nodded once. He pressed his lips together and stared down at the table again. I could see the way his small hands clenched, like he didn't know what to do with them. "It didn't feel right," he said quietly. I reached across the table and rested my hand on his. It didn't feel right to me either. We sat like that for a minute, just holding that silence together. Then he got up from his chair and walked around to where I was sitting. He put his arms around me and hugged me, not a quick, distracted hug like kids give when they're in a hurry, but a long, still one. I felt his little shoulders shake just once before he let go. "I just didn't want you to be by yourself," he said, almost in a whisper. I swallowed hard. "Thank you for coming, son. You don't know how much that means to me." He nodded and went back to his chair, finally taking one of the biscuits and nibbling on it. We talked for a few more minutes. About school, about the science fair coming up, about the neighbor's dog, who always barked at him when he rode his bike past their house. But when it was time for him to go, he hugged me again, longer this time, and looked at me with an expression that was both sad and fierce, like he was carrying something too big for him to name. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching him walk down the sidewalk until he disappeared around the corner, and something inside me shifted. For weeks I had been sinking into this quiet place, trying to make peace with being left out. But that hug, that small, determined visit, it was like someone had lit a candle in the middle of a dark room. I realized I wasn't completely forgotten. Not yet, not by everyone. That night I did something I hadn't done in months. I picked up a hammer and mended the loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet that had been bothering me. Then I tightened the screws on the dining chair that wobbled, swept the kitchen floor, and washed the windows until I could see the faint reflection of my own face in them. It wasn't about making the house ready for company. I wasn't expecting any. It was about making it ready for me. I moved a few things around in the living room, shifted my chair closer to the window so I could watch the street more easily. I put fresh sheets on the bed, not because anyone was coming to visit, but because I deserved clean sheets too. As I worked, I found myself humming a tune I didn't even realize I remembered. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel quite so empty. I thought about what my grandson had done, the way he had made that choice, all on his own, to show up for me. It gave me a strange new strength, one I didn't know I still had. If that boy could be brave enough to come running to my door on a cold afternoon, maybe I could be brave enough to keep living this life with my head held high. When I went to bed that night, I felt tired, but not in the heavy, hopeless way I had been feeling lately. This was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from working with your hands, from setting things right, even in small ways. I lay there for a while, listening to the quiet house, and instead of feeling lonely, I felt present, like I was still part of something. Maybe not their table anymore, but my own. I was sitting by the window when the phone rang. It was late afternoon, one of those cold, gray December days when the sky seems to hang low over the house. I almost didn't answer. When I saw his name on the screen, my first thought was that something was wrong. He doesn't usually call unless there's a reason. I picked it up slowly, bracing myself. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice was careful, not warm, not exactly cold either, just measured. We talked for a minute about nothing much, and then he got to the point. He said, "It would mean a lot to the kids if you came for Christmas this year." He said it almost too quickly, like he'd been rehearsing. I sat there holding the phone, my heart beating a little faster. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe this was his way of reaching out, of saying he missed me, that he wanted me there. But I could hear it, that slight hesitation in his voice, the way he said, "It would mean a lot to the kids." Not, "I miss you, Dad." Not, "I want you there." It felt more like he was inviting me because it was the right thing to do, because maybe someone had asked him if I'd be coming. I told him, "I'll think about it." And I meant it. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. Just those 4 words. After we hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater. I stared out at the yard, at the bare trees shaking slightly in the wind, and I thought about what he'd said. The old me would have said yes immediately. I would have grabbed onto that invitation like a lifeline. I would have told myself, this is my chance to make things right. This is my way back into their lives. But something has shifted in me. It started the day my grandson came to visit. The way he hugged me like he didn't want to let go. It was small, but it was enough to remind me that I am still someone's father, someone's grandfather, that I still matter. So I didn't rush. I let the days go by, one after the other, sitting with that decision. I thought about what it would mean to show up at their house, to sit at their table and smile politely, pretending that everything was fine. Because it isn't fine. They hurt me. Maybe they didn't mean to. Maybe they thought they were doing what was best for themselves, but they still hurt me. And I've spent too many years pretending things don't hurt when they do. I made coffee one morning and just stood in the kitchen holding the mug, thinking about what it would feel like to walk into that house again. I could almost see it. The lights, the smell of food, the sound of wrapping paper being torn open. I could see my grandkids' faces lighting up when they saw me, and then I saw my son's face, tight smile, quick nod, like he'd done his duty by inviting me, and now he could relax. It wasn't enough, not anymore, you know. I've spent so much of my life being grateful for scraps, for the quick phone call, the holiday invitation that came at the last minute, the half-hearted hug at the door. I told myself it was better than nothing, but the truth is, better than nothing still hurts. It still leaves you going home at night with an empty heart. I want more than that now, not just from them, but from myself. I want to be able to sit at my own table and feel at peace with the man I am, not the man who begs for a seat at someone else's. So I waited until the day before Christmas Eve. I dialed his number, and when he answered, I said, "I've decided not to come." There was a pause. He didn't argue. He just said, "Okay, I understand." I'm not sure he really did understand, but I could hear something in his voice. Maybe relief, maybe disappointment. It's hard to tell sometimes. When I hung up, I sat there for a moment, my hand still on the receiver, and then, slowly, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. Not anger, not pride, just strength. Like I'd finally done something for myself. Christmas morning came, and I made myself a simple breakfast. Eggs, toast, a little jam. I put on an old record I hadn't listened to in years, and I sat at the table by the window. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. I thought about my grandson. I thought about the way he hugged me that day, and how he looked back over his shoulder before leaving, like he didn't want to go. That memory warmed me more than any fire could. I don't know what next year will look like. I don't know if they'll invite me again, or if they'll stop asking altogether. But I do know this. I can't keep showing up to pretend everything is okay, just so no one feels uncomfortable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stay home, to sit with the truth, even if it's hard. And you know what? That morning, sitting there with my coffee, I felt enough, just as I was. If you're still here listening to me, maybe you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you've been there yourself, sitting alone on a holiday, wondering if you should have said yes. If you have, I'd like to know. Leave me a comment. And if you understand what it feels like to choose yourself, even when it's hard, go ahead and like this video and subscribe. It helps me keep telling these stories that remind us we're not as alone as we feel. Christmas Eve came, quiet and gray. I woke up early, not because I had anywhere to be, but because I just couldn't sleep. I lay in bed for a while, listening to the hum of the furnace, the creak of the house as it settled. There was no rush that morning, no suitcase to pack, no long drive to make, no wondering if I'd be welcome when I got there. Instead, I got up slowly, made myself a cup of coffee, and stood by the window while it brewed. The street outside was empty, except for a single car parked under a street lamp. The sky was pale, almost white, the kind of sky that makes everything look still. I thought about the years before, the rushing, the worrying, the hoping, the way I used to sit in my car for a few minutes before walking up to their house, trying to prepare my face so I wouldn't look too eager, trying not to say the wrong thing once I was inside, because I didn't want to give anyone another reason to leave me out next year. But this year, I stayed home. By late morning, I had decided what I was going to do. If I wasn't going to their table, I would make one of my own. Not just a sandwich or a frozen dinner, a real meal. Something that reminded me I was still worth sitting down for. I went into the kitchen and started pulling things out of the fridge. A small chicken, some potatoes, a bag of cranberries I'd bought on impulse last week. I set them all on the counter and just looked at them for a moment. It felt strange, cooking for one, but it also felt good. I seasoned the chicken carefully, stuffed a little lemon and garlic inside, and put it in the oven. The smell filled the house slowly, rich and warm, until even the quiet felt softer. I peeled the potatoes, mashed them with butter and cream. I made the cranberry sauce on the stove, stirring until it thickened. It took me most of the afternoon, not because it was hard, but because I let myself take my time. There was no one waiting, no pressure. I even set the table. Just one plate, one glass, one knife and fork, and a candle. I lit it just before I sat down. The house was silent except for the soft hiss of the candle flame. I sat there for a long moment before I took the first bite, just breathing in the quiet. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing through a meal because I felt out of place. I wasn't sitting at the edge of someone else's table, nodding along while they talked about things I wasn't a part of. I was at my own table, eating food I had made with my own hands. And you know something? It felt peaceful, not completely happy. There was still an ache in my chest, a longing I couldn't quite shake, but peaceful all too. The same. I thought about what was probably happening across town. The noise, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. I pictured my grandson sitting at the table, maybe noticing that my chair was empty, maybe asking about me, maybe not. That thought used to break me. The idea of being forgotten, of not being there, used to feel like the worst thing in the world. But tonight, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt chosen, because I had chosen myself. I ate slowly, letting the food warm me. When I was done, I washed the dishes, blew out the candle, and just stood in the kitchen for a while. The house smelled like roast chicken, and it felt like a home again, my home. Later that night, I sat in my chair by the window. The sky had gone dark, and a few snowflakes were falling, catching the light from the street lamp. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't play any music. I just sat there and let the stillness settle around me. For years I had been waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for an invitation, waiting for someone to say, "We miss you, come over." But tonight I wasn't waiting for anything. I wasn't begging for a place to belong. I was already here. I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not exactly happy, not exactly sad. Something quieter, deeper. I felt free. It's a strange thing, freedom. It doesn't always feel light and joyful. Sometimes it feels heavy, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you don't have to jump just because someone tells you to. That night, I dreamed of my old kitchen table, the one from years ago when the kids were small. I could almost hear the sound of their laughter, the scrape of chairs on the floor, the noise of a family that once needed me, and when I woke up, there were tears on my pillow. But there was also a kind of relief. I had made it through the night I had feared for weeks, through the dinner I used to beg for, and I had done it on my own terms. If you're still with me, listening to this, maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you've had to sit at your own table because the one you used to sit at was no longer yours. If you have, I'd like to know. Leave a comment and tell me. And if this story means something to you, click the like button and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing these moments with you. Because sometimes, the quietest nights teach us the loudest lessons. It had been a few weeks since Christmas when I heard the knock on my door. It was soft. The kind of knock a child uses when they aren't sure they should be there. I opened it and there he was, my grandson, cheeks red from the cold, backpack slung over his shoulder. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, stepping inside before I could even answer. His shoes left little wet marks on the mat, and he stood there, shivering a little, looking around like he always does when he comes over. I don't think he was here for any particular reason. Maybe he just wanted somewhere quiet to sit. I asked if he was hungry, and he nodded, so I warmed up some soup I had in the fridge. Nothing fancy, just something I'd made a couple of nights before. I set out 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and we sat together at my kitchen table. It was the first time that table had felt truly full in a long time, not because of the amount of food or the number of people, but because of the way he sat there, like my company was enough. We didn't talk much at first. He slurped his soup quietly, and I just watched him, taking in the little things. The way his hair stuck up in the back, the faint ink smudge on his hand from school. After a few minutes, he looked up and said, "I like it here better, Grandpa. It's quieter." I smiled at that. I could tell he meant it. He wasn't trying to flatter me. He was just telling the truth the way kids do when no one is listening but you. I told him, "You know, no matter what happens, you will always have a place here. This table will always have a chair for you." He didn't say anything for a while. He just kept eating, but I could see his shoulders relax. When he was done, he pushed the bowl away and came over to hug me. And this wasn't a quick hug, the kind kids give before running off to play. It was a long, quiet hug, the kind that says more than words ever could. When he left that day, something stayed behind with me, a feeling I hadn't had in years, a reminder that I am still needed, still loved. I stood in the doorway for a while after he went, watching him walk down the path, his small figure getting smaller until he turned the corner. The house felt quiet again, but not empty. This time, the quiet felt alive. Later that evening, I made myself a simple dinner. I set the table for one, but there was no heaviness in it. I ate slowly, feeling almost grateful. Grateful for the knock on the door, for the soup, for the hug. Grateful that I hadn't forced myself back into a place where I no longer belonged. For so long, I thought my worth depended on being invited, being included, being wanted at the family table. But now I see that my worth doesn't come from a chair in someone else's house. It comes from how I choose to live in mine. I think that's what dignity feels like, when you can sit with yourself and not feel like you're missing something, when you can stop begging for scraps of affection and start living like you deserve more. That night, I wrote in my journal again. I wrote, "Today my house felt like a home again," and I meant it. I won't pretend that everything is suddenly easy. I still miss the days when my kids were small, when we all sat around this table together. I still wish things were different sometimes, but I am learning that wishing won't change what is. What will change is what I choose to do with the days I have left. So I choose to make them full, full of quiet meals, full of small moments, full of the love that still exists, even if it comes in smaller doses now. A few days later, I went to the store and bought a new tablecloth. Nothing fancy, just something fresh and clean. I rearranged the furniture a little, moved a chair closer to the window where the light comes in. I started cooking meals I actually wanted to eat, not just things that were quick and easy. I even bought a puzzle and spread it out on the coffee table, piece by piece, day by day. And slowly, this little house, my house, began to feel like a place I wasn't just living in, but living for. If you're still here, listening, maybe you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you know how it feels to be slowly pushed to the edges until you barely recognize the life you're in. If you do, I hope you also know that you can take yourself back. You can choose to stop waiting for a call that may never come. You can set your own table, light your own candle, and make your own peace. And if you've ever had someone like my grandson, someone who still sees you, who still comes knocking, hold on to that. Because sometimes, one person is enough to remind you that you still matter. That night, as I turned out the lights and headed to bed, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had stopped trying to fix it. I had simply chosen to live. And that, I think, is how this story ends. Not with a grand reunion or a dramatic confrontation, but with a man who finally understands that his life is still his own. I may not have my old place in the family anymore, but I have a place here. A place in this house. A place at this table. A place in my grandson's heart. And for now, that is enough. If you've been with me through this whole story, thank you. I'd like to hear from you. Has there been a moment in your life where you chose yourself, even when it hurt? Leave me a comment and tell me. And if this story spoke to you, please like and subscribe so we can share more moments like this together. Because sometimes, just knowing we aren't alone makes all the difference.